Twitter and Facebook censorship of New York Post Biden Ukraine story, the beginning of social tyranny. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about Twitter and Facebook and social media companies that are censoring a New York Post story that alleges that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, in communications with Burisma Holdings executives, actually arranged for meetings between Joe Biden and Burisma executives at a time when Joe Biden was getting the Ukrainian chief prosecutor fired, who was said to have been investigating Burisma Holdings for corruption and used $1.2 billion International Monetary Fund loan to incentivize the Ukrainian president at the time, Poroshenko, to fire the prosecutor, Viktor Shokin. This was obviously the subject of the impeachment of President Donald Trump that failed. President Trump was found not guilty in the U.S. Senate for looking into this matter, which is certainly real. Biden himself was bragging about getting the prosecutor fired and using the $1.2 billion IMF loan as leverage to get that done. And now it turns out, if true, that according to these emails, that Joe Biden himself was meeting with Burisma executives, which certainly doesn't look good considering the allegations from Viktor Shokin that he was investigating Burisma at the time that he was fired. But more so, we're looking at the censorship, and this story, I think, is legitimate. You have, however, the emails were obtained by the New York Post. The Twitter is saying, oh, this might have been illegal, we can't publish that. Twitter doesn't delete the Twitter accounts of newspapers that use classified information to produce stories. It's a First Amendment, freedom of the press issue where even if you get illegally obtained information, you still have the right to run the story. That was the Pentagon Papers Supreme Court case. And I think it's the standard that, frankly, the marketplace ought to be putting itself onto. It's that, if this is a freedom of the press issue, if a news organization is going to publish something, even if Twitter or Facebook disagrees with it, they shouldn't be suppressing it. Or if it's political and it might favor the Trump campaign over the Biden campaign in this election cycle, just because it's a negative story for Biden doesn't mean it shouldn't be published or allowed to be shared on these platforms. But that's exactly what is happening. Now, Twitter and Facebook limited distribution of an October 14th report from the New York Post's Emma Jo Morris and Gabriel Fonraj. Smoking gun email reveals how Hunter Biden introduced Ukrainian businessmen to VP Dad. And if you look at the email, this was sent on April 17, 2015, allegedly. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and given an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and pleasure. As we spoke yesterday evening, would be great to meet today for a quick coffee. What do you think? I could come to your office somewhere around noon or so before I'm on my way to the airport. And this is from Vadim Pozarski, and he is a Burisma Holdings executive. Hunter Biden, at the time, was serving on the board of directors of Burisma Holdings, and it said that that relationship is what compelled Biden to get the prosecutor fired, who was said to be looking into Burisma Holdings. That's the allegation. And now the Wall Street Journal's Robert McGilling and Jeff Horwitz, they reported on October 15 that Facebook and Twitter limited sharing of the New York Post articles that the Biden campaign is disputing. Quote, Twitter on Wednesday blocked users from posting links to the articles, initially citing a potential violation of its rules regarding hacked materials. The company later said the articles also violated its policies on displaying private information like email addresses and phone numbers without a person's permission. Twitter's move came after Facebook also limited the distribution of the articles on its platform, saying it is awaiting guidance from its third-party fact-checking partners, independent organizations that routinely review the accuracy of viral content. Facebook has slowed the spread of the Post articles pending a decision by those partners, company spokesman Andy Stone said in a Twitter message on Wednesday. Now, again, the email is what it is. It's said to be on this computer that was left at a computer shop. Supposedly the computer belonged to Hunter Biden. And Twitter and Facebook, again, they're claiming that the news report somehow violates their terms of services. This is illegally obtained materials. But if you look at Twitter, for example, they've never banned WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, like other news organizations like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times and so forth, use classified national security information sources for their news stories, particularly on foreign policy and other NSA, the National Security Agency, The Guardian. Glenn Greenwald, he also published with the Washington Post on that story, which looked at the Edward Snowden revelations. He had leaked a bunch of classified information from the National Security Agency. And, this serves a public purpose. It's a public interest. The government is spying on you. It's spying on everyone. That's what Ed Snowden was saying. And that was a legitimate story, even if it was illegally obtained, even though Edward Snowden broke the law. You could say, was he a traitor? Was he a patriot? I err on the side that he was doing what he perceived to be his patriotic duty. And we're all better off knowing about it because the government shouldn't be spying on everybody. And I think that's wrong. And organizations like WikiLeaks, as controversial as they are, they're allowed to operate on Twitter. And, but the New York Post, they're getting their articles because it was illegally obtained or whatever, or these emails shouldn't have been given to the Post, that somehow this is going to be blocked on places like Twitter and Facebook. And I think that's wrong. I think that that's a bad standard. New York Post clearly has a First Amendment right to publish them. It's freedom of the press, something social media companies, again, they've in the past defended. WikiLeaks still has its Twitter account. Now, the Biden campaign, for its part, is saying that this was not on the official schedule of meeting between Joe Biden and this Burisma executive. And then later, reporting in Politico by Kyle Cheney and Natasha Bertrand on October 14th, they held out the possibility that this could actually meeting could have happened, but it might have been an informal meeting, according to the story. Quote, Biden's campaign would not rule out the possibility that the former VP had some kind of informal interaction with Pozarski, which wouldn't appear on Biden's official schedule. But they said any encounter would have been cursory. Okay, well, the trouble for Biden, of course, is that he's accused, and he kind of outed himself in this Council on Foreign Relations event in January of 2018, where he just outed himself. He said that I got this prosecutor fired, and this was a speech, and this was a public event. And according to it, he said, I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm leaving here. And I think it was about 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time. The prosecutor was fired. That was Victor Shokin. And he was replaced by someone called Lutsenko. But Shokin says that he was fired because he was looking into Burisma, according to reporting from John Solomon, who interviewed him. And in an affidavit to the European Court, Victor Shokin, ex-prosecutor, stated, quote, the truth is that I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma Holdings, a natural gas firm active in Ukraine, and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was a member of the board of directors. On several occasions, President Poroshenko asked me to have a look at the case against Burisma and consider the possibility of winding down the investigative efforts in respect of this company, but I refused to close the investigation. And then in a call between Joe Biden and Poroshenko that was leaked, it turns out that Biden himself was again confirming this quid pro quo. Quote, congratulations on installing the new prosecutor general. It's going to be critical for him to work quickly to repair the damage Shokin did. And I'm a man of my word. And now that the new prosecutor general is in place, we're ready to move ahead in signing that $1 billion loan guarantee. So this confirms his Council on Foreign Relations account. The phone call was said to have been recorded by Poroshenko himself. And this, again, was the matter that President Trump brought up to President Zelensky. He replaced Poroshenko as president in Ukraine, and President Trump spoke to him on July 25th, 2019. And this was shortly after Mueller had concluded his probe and testified to Congress. And so President Trump's on the phone with Zelensky saying, you should look into this matter between the Bidens and Poroshenko and the Salome. And, quote, Trump said, it sounds horrible to me. And now it looks like Biden may have even met with the Burisma executives, according to the smoke and gun email. And I think that, yeah, that looks pretty bad for Joe Biden. But, that's no reason for Twitter and Facebook to, say you can't publish that. And according to Ron Johnson, Senate Homeland Security Committee chairman, they're looking into this. He's a Republican senator out of Wisconsin. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee is investigating newly released emails that reveal that Hunter Biden introduced his father, former Vice President Joe Biden, to a top executive at Ukrainian natural gas firm Burisma Holdings in 2015 at Hunter's request. According to Johnson, quote, "We regularly meet and speak with individuals who email the committee's whistleblower account to determine whether we can validate their claims. Although we consider those communications to be confidential, because the individual in this instance spoke with the media about his contact with the committee, we can confirm receipt of his email complaint, have been in contact with the whistleblower, and are in the process of validating the information he provided." So this could be legitimate. Senate committees are looking into it. If Joe Biden wins the election, we could be talking about this for months. This could be subject of oversight. This could be, if something illegal was done, this could even lead to Biden's impeachment should he win the election. In the meantime, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai issued a statement about Section 230 potential regulation of social media companies. And they've been tasked by the Department of Commerce. They petitioned the commission to, quote, clarify ambiguities in Section 230. And, quote, "As elected officials consider whether to change the law, the question remains, what does Section 230 currently mean? Many advance an overly broad interpretation that in some cases shields social media companies from consumer protection laws in a way that has no basis in the text of Section 230. The Commission's General Counsel has informed me that the FCC has the legal authority to interpret Section 230. Consistent with that advice, I intend to move forward with the rulemaking to clarify its meaning. Throughout my tenure at the FCC, I have favored regulatory parity, transparency, and free expression. Social media companies have a First Amendment right to free speech, but they do not have a First Amendment right to a special immunity denied to other media outlets such as newspapers and broadcasters." So the Twitter and Facebooks of the world, YouTube, etc., they lean on the idea that, well, these are user-generated accounts, so we can't be held liable for other people. Since Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is thought to protect these companies as a liability shield. And here the FCC is saying, well, actually, that might be an overly broad interpretation. So you might want to think twice about that. And there could be regulation that's coming here. And adding to the furor, though, at Twitter, they actually suspended the White House press secretary from Twitter, Kayleigh McEnany. Twitter had me at gunpoint by locking the account, she told Sean Hannity in an interview. Quote, "They essentially had me at gunpoint and said, unless you delete this story, a news story by the New York Post, I cannot regain access to my account." And so that's pretty heinous, if you ask me. Here's the press secretary sharing a news story that's not favorable to Joe Biden. That's her job. She's supposed to share those stories and have a public statement from the White House, from the president about that. And, President Trump saying, hey, I told you so. This whole thing was very, very fishy. And it turns out maybe Joe Biden met with these Burisma executives. I think that's worth looking into. Now, she's since had her account restored, McEnany. But the threat to press freedom, I think, posed by these big tech firms is quite clear. They've anointed themselves the arbiters of everything that's true, so they're going to determine which news stories are accurate or not and can be allowed to be shared on their platforms. But while Twitter, Facebook, and other firms certainly have a part of the marketplace of ideas, they don't have a monopoly on it yet. Now, I look at this tweet from Jack Dorsey, Twitter CEO. He says, great read, interesting take. Why is there no bipartisan way at this juncture in our history? One side must win. And here Dorsey was linking to an article that was endorsing one-party rule, saying that we can't have a two-party system. It should be more like California. And of course, the Democrats should win. And that way they can, jam through their agenda and there won't be any opposition. And they think this will be more efficient, I guess. I don't know. I mean, that's what totalitarians around the world, they say, oh, well, we can't have all this democracy and debates and press freedoms. We need to ratchet things down. Quote, America can't afford more political paralysis. One side side or the other must win. This is a civil war that can be won without firing a shot, but it is a fundamental conflict between two worldviews that must be resolved in short order. And they call for, quote, democratic one-party rule as the means of reconciling issues inside the country, economic issues, what type of system we're going to have, political issues, the Constitution, etc. And they support implementing, obviously, a progressive agenda. And Dorsey says, oh, that's a great read. Yeah, of course we should have one-party rule. Are we beginning to see now what this one-party rule will look like in the U.S. with Twitter and Facebook acting as party spokespersons and ministries of propaganda for the Democratic Party? It sure looks that way. This is a mortal danger, I think, to press freedom and freedom of speech, etc. John Stuart Mill, he wrote the best essay on freedom of speech and of the press called On Liberty in 1859. And I'm going to read you a couple passages here because I think John Stuart Mill, he knew more about, I think, what the preconditions for liberty are and what it means and what the implications are, and even how liberty can be denied, not just by the government, but by private institutions. There can be social tyranny that comes with that. He warned of a social tyranny, a quote, it's kind of like the tyranny of the majority that could impose censorship that would be, quote, more formidable than government censorship, and it could even enslave the soul. Quote, when society itself is the tyrant, society collectively over the separate individuals who compose it, its means of tyrannizing are not restricted to the acts which it may do by the hands of its political functionaries. Society can and does execute its own mandates. And if it issues wrong mandates instead of right, or any mandates at all in things which it ought not to meddle, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since, though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself. Now, I would say that the social tyranny is really, it's taking root in the United States right now, in America, and it's arbitrating what can and cannot be said, what can and cannot be shared. Apparently, you're not allowed to criticize Joe Biden and publish emails from his son, even if it reveals corruption of Joe Biden in orchestrating getting a prosecutor fired in a foreign country and using U.S. taxpayer money, some of it, it goes to the IMF, to make this loan to a Ukrainian, basically saying, yay, you can have the loan, but you got to fire this prosecutor because maybe his son worked for Burisma. Maybe that's what he was concerned about. That's certainly what President Trump thought when he was talking to Zelensky and saying, hey, you want to look into this. This sounds kind of corrupt to me. And I think it is kind of corrupt. And Ukraine can pursue any investigations that it wants to. It's a sovereign country, and we shouldn't be interfering with that and telling them to fire prosecutors. I think that's wrong. I think that doesn't serve U.S. interests. And if I'm Ukraine, or if you're another foreign country, you're thinking like, hey, why is the U.S. pushing us around like this? Maybe. I think that this could actually harm our foreign relations. Maybe what President Trump was doing was trying to restore good relations with Ukraine. And certainly that's within his presidential prerogative. And by the way, President Obama or Vice President Biden, they could leverage the loan to try to get the prosecutor fired if that's what U.S. policy is. But I don't know why U.S. policy is to cover up corruption investigations in foreign countries. And I'll leave you with the close here. It is irrelevant how the New York Post and any other news organizations obtains its information, classified or otherwise. That goes to sources. That's freedom of the press. And it's a question of whether it's going to be protected or not. We do not support corporate censorship on social media any more than we would support governmental censorship. As Mill wrote, quote, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.